All right. Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session. I see that we are already above 100 people in the room. That's absolutely fantastic to hear. And I think it's a great pleasure to have everyone from all kind of regions, from different corners of the globe um, in this session. So thank you for joining and welcome to the session of our panel discussion on preprints and their roles, as well as the role of independent peer review services in crisis time. We had a really kind and nice debate about the role of journals in crisis time, and there were also discussions about preprints and peer review and quality control. So I'm really excited to go through this together, having that background of the morning sessions. Without further ado, I'd like to just present a few kind of reminders, because in the morning I saw that many discussions happened in the chat box, and I highly appreciate if you keep the discussions in the Q&A session. And if you have questions for our panelists, please make sure that you put their names in the Q&A session when you're asking questions to them. If you're sharing on social media like me, I was frantically tweeting about the events and discussions, please make sure you're using hashtag #EaseEvents and EaseEditors handle. And if you are quoting our panelists, if you are questioning or debating any of the topics that we are discussing now, please make sure that you're using, again, the hashtag, and also kindly use and address our panelists with their Twitter handle, which I shortly present to you. But before that, I would really love to know a little bit more about you, participants in the room. Could you tell us a little bit more about your role in scholarly communication? Choose one of the answers in this poll so that we know a bit more about you. Brilliant. Can we have the results now? All right. So we have lots of academics and editors. And well, it seems that my design of the poll was not also very much inclusive, because I have lots of none of the aboves option here. So it's really interesting to see that as well. Thank you for teaching me a lesson. So without further ado, let me also take you through our panelists. So on the very left side of the slide, you have Bianca Kramer. Bianca is a librarian for life sciences and medicine at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, with a strong focus on scholarly communication and open science. Throughout her work on Project 101 Innovations in Scholarly Communication, she's investigating trends in research output and usage of the innovative tools that are available for scholarly communication throughout the research cycle, with a specific focus on open infrastructures, of course. And she's also a board member of Force 11. Please make sure that if you have any questions for Bianca, you're making sure that the name and the Twitter handle is already there. Sorry, I was trying to see whether Janne is on the call. Well, he will join eventually if he's not. Janne Sepanen is a founder of Peerage of Science and its managing director. Peerage of Science is an independent peer review service. He's also team lead in research support at Open Science Center of University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And next to Janne, we have Jessica on the call. Jessica is executive director of ASAP Bio, which is a nonprofit organization in the US promoting transparency in life sciences. She's also a Plan S ambassador and affiliate at the Knowledge Futures Group, as well as steering committee member of Rescuing Biomedical Research. Then we have Mario on the call. It's quite early for Mario. He's joining us from Los Angeles. So really thank you, Mario. I guess it's like 4 o'clock for you now. Mario is a co-editor-in-chief of Journal of Research Integrity and Peer Review. He's also an analyst in Meta Research Innovation Center in Princeton. He's running a lot of studies and research, meta research, particularly on preprint. Next to Mario, we have Monica. Monica is joining us from Canada. She is leadership team member of Pre-Review, another independent peer review service, and she's also policy analyst for Environment and Climate Change Canada, specifically for open science. And today I have the pleasure of help by Duncan in Q&A section. So Duncan is monitoring the Q&As, and he will bring all the discussions back to the session. And Mary is really kindly helping us with all kind of polls that we will run throughout the session. And
Bahar?
Yes, Mary?
Bahar, can we just pause a moment so that we can try and find Yanan?
Please, yes.
He is on the call, but he's appearing renamed as somebody else. So I'm going to just try just for a moment to let those people speak to see which one is him. So can you just bear with me just a moment? I'm sorry,
I'm going
everybody.
to put myself on mute. No worries. I think we still have a few more minutes before Jana can join us. So let me just give an overview of the topics we are going to discuss today. We want to first and foremost understand how preprints came into the picture, and what is the status quo of preprint services, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also want to know how journal policies regarding preprints have been changing in the course of time, particularly during the COVID-19. And of course, it would be great to also understand a little bit about how researchers and academics find these preprints and studies, and how do they evaluate, and what kind of control mechanisms are on top of these papers. And of course, another important aspect is to understand how the preprints content is debated in public domains and discussed with different parts of the public domain. And if we can get more time, we would definitely love to also include discussions about how diverse and inclusive are those public domain debates and discussions and evaluations. And let me start with a brief history, because it's good to know where we came from when we are looking at the present situation. I guess rapid dissemination of research outside the traditional journal publication started in 1961 with an experiment run by National Institutes of Health called Information Exchanges Group, where basically, researchers in the field of biology were invited to share their documents and research outputs in this group. And 7 years after, they had to shut down that experiment, despite the fact that there were more than 2,500 documents have been shared, because simply journals were not ready and did not want to publish any previously circulated article in their journals. 30 years after, physicists rejuvenated the idea of rapid dissemination by building archive, initially small, only for high energy physics, but in the course of time, archive grew. We now know, all of us know archive, even not the physicists in the room. And archive not only grew—
Hey, Bahar.
Hello?
Sorry to interrupt you. You're not sharing your screen. Could you
really?
share the screen to people?
Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So that's it. Where am I in Zoom? Thanks for the shout out. Right. Okay, there we are. Give me a second. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that was much needed. So yes, physicists started with arXiv, and of course, in the course of time, arXiv grew. It's now covering not only physics topics, but many topics outside, physics and mathematics and chemistry, even in computer sciences. There is a strong community in there. And last I checked, the number of submissions on arXiv are also growing exponentially. In 2019 only, they had above 13,000 submissions per month. Other communities, again in the US, also started with a similar idea. SSRN started for the community of social sciences and humanities 3 years after arXiv started, and still is growing in different topics. Also in Europe, communities started to think about rapid dissemination. And we see HAL beginning on 2001 with the support of CNRS in France starting. And finally, 50-something years after, biologists started again to do something about preprints, and in 2013, bioRxiv came into the picture, and since then we see a big number of options, basically, for different topics and different article formats and forms and audiences in the realm of preprints. Well, if we had Janne, I would love to see his kind of take on what we learned from this, but I'm not sure whether Janne is still on the call. Okay, so it's a very unfortunate event, but then I have to skip Janne's slides, and then I'd like to go slightly further throughout the discussion and see. Well, maybe a pause and getting back to the room to find out what the room thinks about the role of preprint servers during COVID-19 outbreak. Mary, could you please put on the votes? Thank you. Nice. So 52% believes that they help advance in progress of knowledge. And it follows by 36% of not really sure about this, and they are eager to know more from our panelists. That's absolutely fantastic. So maybe we can start with Bianca. Bianca, you are monitoring the growth of preprints content in terms of particularly for the COVID-19. So can you say something about, tell us more about your observations?
Yes, thank you, Bahar. As you can see on this slide, this is some work I'm doing together with Niklas Fraser from the Leibniz Information Center in Germany, where we're tracking COVID-related preprints on a number of different preprint servers. So not just from bioRxiv and medRxiv, but from a number of other preprint servers. And I think it's really interesting to see that, first of all, after quite a sharp rise in number of preprints per week, it's now leveling out, maybe declining, but I would say it's plateauing at the moment, at about a little more than 1,000 per week, a little bit over, which, if you compare that to the number of journal articles published on COVID, is about half of them. And I think Jessica will kind of address that further. And the other thing that you see, there's really a divergent landscape of which preprint servers does this contribute to. So it's not just bioRxiv and medRxiv, but a lot of preprint servers across disciplines that contribute to COVID-related preprints.
Indeed, it is actually quite surprising to see SSRN being right below medRxiv. SSRN being, the preprint initially for social sciences and humanities, and it shows how dynamic preprints are in terms of covering different topics and addressing communities' needs when it is
Yes,
needed. Yeah,
definitely. I think you can see different developments here. Also, publisher-mediated preprints. Also,
of course.
Regional, the growth of Cielo over the last week I found quite interesting. So there are a
Yeah.
couple of different developments that you can
Brilliant. Absolutely. Jessica, maybe you can follow up on that and tell us more about, how different content, COVID-related and non-COVID-related articles on preprint are kind of related to each other. You ran recently this study about comparing COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 articles. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, so this study is also being kind of headed up by Nicholas Fraser and Liam Brearley as the sort of first authors here. And what we did was take papers on bioRxiv and medRxiv and compared them to papers that are focusing on COVID versus those that are not. And what we found, both by looking at the word count and by examining pairs of preprints that had subsequently been published in a journal, was that there's a smaller number of figure panels and tables in these COVID-related preprints, and a smaller number of words that appear and references as well, which suggests that there's something different about these COVID-19 related preprints. Perhaps they are being shared earlier in the research process. There's more urgency to get information out, even if it is a kind of smaller unit, as it were. So I think this is a really exciting development in terms of how preprints are being used and when they're communicated.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because we had also this conversation in the morning about, what is the role of journals in this time. And there was a discussion about, journals have a different role and preprints are there for these kind of quick and fast and rapid dissemination, and that's what exactly you also see in preprints. They are smaller, shorter, and they have less kind of number of tables and data points probably. All right, so it is quite fascinating to see how the content is growing, and as Bianca mentioned, there is also an angle from publishers and funders, support and change of policy, basically from 1961, let's say, till 2020. Monica, we recently heard about OASPA's call for review. Can you tell us more about that? What is OASPA's initiative about?
Yeah, hi everyone. So the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association recently issued a letter basically recognizing some of what Bianca was showing us, and that is there are a lot of preprints coming out, and we need people to look at these preprints and sort of use their expertise to validate, or at least the first step of validation. So in the letter, they were looking to sort of recruit a body of rapid reviewers. So reviewers that pledge to go through and review quickly, and to leverage some of the tools that we'll be talking a little bit more about in this session to produce rapid reviews and rapid feedback of all of these preprints that are coming in, at 1,000 a week. Fantastic. So you can read more a little bit about their letter on their website. So.
Thank you. And Bianca, in comparison, also this was also mentioned in the morning. I think Anna mentioned that in comparison to SARS pandemic, the number of papers and published articles at the end of SARS pandemic in 2003, I guess, were only 29, whereas now we have thousands of paper published, and the pandemic is still ongoing. What are the kind of implications? Do we see any journals kind of policies around, for example, metadata linking, which was also quite an important topic during the debate session about transparency? Can you tell us more about those policies, Bianca?
Sorry, now you can hear me. I think in general, the preprint landscape and how journals relate to that has matured a lot if you compare it to a couple of years ago with Ebola and also with Zika. I should say that probably the response to it might also have to do with a very Western-centered perspective. So the fact that this is something that's global, and global in this case meaning also really affecting all countries. So I do think that makes a difference.
Right.
Unfortunately. But If you can go to the next slide.
Yes.
Some indication of how this landscape progressed. I think what you're seeing in the way that journals relate to preprints, that runs all the way from changing policies on preprints, so allowing preprints, not letting preprints be an impediment to submission to a journal. That's something that Jessica, among others, also inventorized in the Transpose project, leading all the way to publishers sort of basically running their own preprint servers, either separate or on platforms like SSRN or Research Square, or having more an open publishing, open research platform, like we see with Avant 1000, now from Taylor and Francis, which we see with Sage, with Wiley with Autoria, and Sage Advance.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's really a spectrum. And you can also see journals requesting preprints to be posted. There was a Twitter discussion from with Nature about that. Integrating preprints in submission and review workflows, so making it easier if you submit a preprint to then submit to the journal or vice versa, and integrating it in the review workflow. And we'll hear more about that specifically later on in the session.
Yes, absolutely.
And indeed, I think one final thing, sorry,
yes.
The linking of preprints to published versions. That's also something that journals could do to make sure that there is that linkage, not just one way, but really a two-way linkage.
Absolutely, yes. And Mario, you are an editor yourself. How do you see journal policies being changed and adapted to the situation? And what are the impacts on both COVID-19 papers, but also non-COVID-19 papers?
First, I would like to say, let us not forget when all of this began that there has been a huge change and disruption in daily lives of people. And what we saw initially from publishers is that they were putting messages out there and sending reminders to reviewers telling them to take as much time as they need in these strange times to review papers. But then, of course, the surge of COVID papers came in. And what we've seen is a complete opposite of that. Reviewers were being asked to review papers just within a few days. Even last week, personally, I got an invite to review a COVID paper, asking me to do it within 4 days. If we look at the paper that has recently been published in biomedicine, the median time right now for publication of COVID papers in PubMed is 11 days, which means from submission to the journal, going through the peer review and already publishing in 11 days is something that no one of us would have expected that we would be here if we were talking, a year ago. So I think a lot has definitely changed. And what is extremely interesting is, will this actually affect us after COVID times if that thing happens? Will we actually speed up this? And I have seen it with my friends and colleagues, some of them saying that they will no longer accept to review papers unless they can guarantee they will do it within 1 week.
Right.
I think it's questioning our dependency of doing this just 1 month or 2 months, depending on the fields, of how long it takes us to do this.
Absolutely. This was something that one of the editors of The Lancet, Naomi, in the morning also mentioned, like the flexibility and the change in the workflow and speed that they have experienced give them this vision that we should not go back to the way we were doing things before this pandemic. So maybe that's a positive lesson we can learn from this terrible situation. Great. So we do see that journals are participating in rapid dissemination as well. But Bianca, maybe you can help us to understand how researchers find content on preprints and how in this big zoo of different types of preprints, actually researchers find where to go to find the most relevant type of studies.
Yes, I always find that an interesting question because, yes, there are quite a lot of preprint servers out here. There are 47 here, and there are already some missing. But I also like to always counter that question, like how do researchers and readers in this enormous zoo of journals find the right place to publish? So I think there are a couple of things at play here. When you look at all the different preprint servers, you can see some of them are, can you, sorry? Yes, this one for a moment. Some of them are multidisciplinary, but some of them serve a very specific discipline. So that might be both when you search for content or when you search for preprint, for where to publish a preprint, might be a consideration. Does it serve the community? Does it reach the community that you want to reach? And for some of them, that community is regional, like for AfriArchive, for India Archive, the WIN archives for Indonesia. So they really focus on research output from a specific regional area, and that can also make that more visible, but also help communication within that area about research. And like I said, some of them are mediated by publishers, so they might have a role in the whole submission workflow with publishers. So there are different considerations, I think, for authors when they decide where to preprint.
Right.
Community, where it fits in the research workflow, ease of use, but also what licenses do the preprint servers allow, and does that meet your requirements? Things like that. Also, perhaps the governance. It is a community-governed initiative. Is it commercially owned? Those kind of things. Where does that fit with your own values?
Right. I see that, that there are particular archives really regional, like China Archive or the India Archive. Are they also in a specific language, or they are all publishing in English?
I think they allow. They can allow more languages. I know the Indonesian one definitely allows Bahasa Indonesia and has a lot of it there. And maybe I know Jo Haveman is in the audience. Maybe she can later on say something about the policies
it would be
of
great.
AfriArchive.
In that respect. To hear from the audience as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Maybe on your question about how to find preprints.
Yes.
So one option is to go to a specific preprint server if that serves your community or your region and you want to search for that. But preprints are also increasingly findable in the larger bibliographic databases. If you can go to the next slide. So that's also a place where you can go to find preprints, like Lens or Dimensions or OSI preprint search that covers a lot of the different preprints archives. But of course, it differs. Their coverage differ. Which preprint server do they include? Do they make preprints findable as preprints, so as a separate publication type? And that's really a maturing field. And it's something my colleague Jeroen Bosman and myself also are tracking. So on the next slide, there is this, I call it the sunshine sheet because it's really colorful.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see all these different data
but
points.
we're sort of tracking from the different preprints, how many of the preprints, how many preprints are covered in the different databases and how good they are, they're findable.
Do you look into this on a regular basis, like weekly, daily?
It's something that we work on sort of in bits and
right.
How do you call it? Fits and starts?
Yeah. Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, but it's really useful also to get a grip of to get a view of the landscape and how things are progressing, and also to have discussions with these also discovery systems.
Yes, absolutely. It's a lot of information in this particular slide. Jessica, how preprints themselves are making this kind of discoverability part of their activities?
Well, I think that there's a lot that comes down to what metadata preprint servers are surfacing or depositing into Crossref or making available in other ways in the case of preprint servers that don't use DOIs like Archive. This is just to say that we have a resource on our website which tracks where content can be found, but frankly, I think that the resource that Bianca showed is far superior in terms of relating this. But I think that the issue of metadata that preprints are surfacing is something that we are working on in the context of a recommendation coming out of a meeting we held in January called BioPreprints 2020. But something else I wanted to highlight on the next slide, if I may, is that actually last week, the NIH, the National Library of Medicine here in the US, announced that preprints would begin appearing on PubMed Central and PubMed. And in the first phase of this trial, it's just COVID-19 related preprints by NIH-funded authors. And this will then expand further to NIH, all NIH-funded authors. But I think that this is significant in the sense that PubMed has, for the first time, included preprints, which is something that I think is very significant in terms of their adoption into researcher workflows. That said, Europe PubMed Central has been leading the charge for about 2 years now, as Bianca mentioned, and they also announced that they're including the full text of COVID-19 preprints, I believe earlier this week. So there's a lot of change from these indexing services that are frequently used by biomedical researchers.
Indeed, and this is just the beginning of a big step towards having more studies available at the preprint level. But how do we make sure that there is a quality aspects available on all these studies? Mario, you run meta-research on preprints. Can you tell us more about guidelines and quality assurance on preprints?
Yes, thank you. So one of the things we always have to go back is what do we think about quality when we say quality of papers even published in journals? We believe that that quality is something that is given by the editorial and by the peer review process that happens when you submit a paper to a journal and then it goes through all of these stages. Now, preprint servers were never meant to do this. They are just places where people should post their working papers, or e-prints as they were called previously. Now we call them more preprints, but it's a paper that theoretically can still be improved and you want feedback from the community. So when it comes to actual quality checks, majority of the surveys that we looked at do and say that they do some kind of screening checks. And these are very similar to the initial screening checks that journals do, and that is to see, did you list your email address? Have you put your affiliation there, or have you, submitted a paper that looks like it has an introduction, methods, results in discussion? But they don't go beyond that because there is no peer review process as such. Now, of all the preprint servers out there, the only one that I'm aware that explicitly says what it has done is the Research Square, which gives a badge of all the preprints that they host that they have been pre-screened. And you can see on this slide here, what does that screening check look like? Now, one thing I have to say, none of the preprint servers, but also none of the journals actually say or name the person who is doing this. Is this being done by one person or two persons? If they are using plagiarism checks, which some of the servers do, which one are they using? Because we don't know also if you are using a plagiarism check and we're talking about preprints, who are you comparing it to? With more than 60 preprint servers out there being there, the most common plagiarism check is Authenticate, but that doesn't check preprints. That checks only published papers. So if you are using any plagiarism software, are you checking what's being posted and on which servers? We don't know that. But again, I would have to say that that information is also often very untransparent when it comes to the journals themselves. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that we have seen in COVID times, and that's the last my point in this, is that preliminary reports, many servers have actually posted disclaimers saying that we shouldn't take preprints to be as concrete evidence as we take papers in published journals. So you can see one of those messages here, but it's replicated both in archive, in medRxiv and bioRxiv, saying that, take this with a grain of salt. These are people's working papers, and it's then for the community to see how good or bad or assign any quality checks to them.
So I should have gone through your slides, right? But I forgot, Mario.
No, that is completely fine. We're good with that.
Jessica, how preprints do this letting the audience know that what's happening at the article level in preprints? Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Just to pick up on what Mario mentioned, even though preprint servers are not making claims as to the validity of a paper, I think that some still feel a sense of obligation to ensure that material is not sort of stamped with a implication of validity by virtue of being disseminated on that platform. And so I think we can see elements of this in a recent decision by bioRxiv to not allow posting of papers that are based upon in silico predictions of drug performance related to COVID-19, which caused quite a bit of tension on Twitter, as you can see here. So I would say that I think that the question as to the idea of protecting public health is something that is still considered by several servers. But I do want to come to the point that you mentioned, Bahar, that the real quality control for preprints happens in the open. And it is a feature of preprints that they allow a kind of broad and public feedback on papers early in the research cycle in a way that is not possible with the kind of traditional publishing setup. Science, of course, happens iteratively. It is self-correcting, and preprints allow this type of correction to happen faster by virtue of exposing papers to a broader audience early in the process. So, for example, there's an infamous preprint that I'm sure all of us, or many of us in the audience, are aware of, that was posted on, I believe, on a Friday on bioRxiv earlier this year, claiming similarity between HIV and coronavirus, which was retracted withdrawn by the authors within 48 hours following over 100 comments posted directly on the paper. So here's an example where the exposure of a highly interesting paper garners reaction that can help science correct itself faster.
On that note of commenting on preprints, Monica, can you tell us about pre-review and its collaboration on basically running peer review on preprints?
Yeah, so just building on what Jessica said, so preprints allow us to give comments and integrate those comments a lot quickly. But how could we make it easier for people to do that other than just putting comments on the comment page on bioRxiv or on Twitter? And so that's where pre-review comes in. And so pre-review is a platform that allows you to bring in a preprint and sort of review it either in a long form, or recently we just launched at the beginning of the year this Outbreak Science Rapid Pre-Review, which makes it even easier to rapidly review preprints. So it's a structured review platform. So basically you're given a series of multiple choice questions on a preprint that you want to review. So here is just a little screenshot of what the platform looks like. You can bring in the preprint using the DOI. It pops up a series of multiple choice questions, thereby making it a lot easier for you to review preprints, particularly in the context of COVID-19, where you want to leverage all of that community knowledge and expertise to quickly, review and validate, these thousands of preprints that are coming in that are just COVID related.
And are there any kind of discussions around those questions? So have these questions been collectively chosen by the community, or is a board that is deciding what kind of questions should reviewers answer on those preprints, Monica?
Yeah, we're working actually with some public health experts. So one of the co-founders of Outbreak Science is Michael Johansson, and he works for the Centers for Disease Control. We're also working with other community members who have posited new questions that we can integrate into the platform as well. So it's another great thing about working in open source is that we can reuse this for like other purposes, but also continually and dynamically change the platform to suit the community and even editorial needs.
Amazing. And do you see also rapid growth on the usage of the tool among researchers reviewing the preprints?
Yeah, definitely. With, of course, this came out in January, so this was before the pandemic was declared. So it was just
you were foreseeing the future.
Yeah, we were. This was actually built in response to like Zika and the SARS outbreaks, knowing that potentially a new pandemic would come upon us. And so, we're just hoping for more adoption. We have that, we're hoping that if we build it, they will come. We just need more adoption, and we're also sort of open to changing anything in the platform to sort of better suit the community, and again, also sort of editorial processes as well.
Absolutely. Switching gears to the discussions on public domain, we saw during the presentation a couple of examples of discussions happening on Twitter. So Bianca, can you tell us more about the public domain and the public aspects of available items on preprints?
Unmute. Well, in general, I can say that there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of of course, preprints are discussed in the media. They are taken together with published research and being discussed. The extent to which the status of preprints is discussed, that's increasing. That's my informal observation. I'm hoping to do some more formal research on that. But as you can see here, are collected here just some media headings, some headlines. There's also a lot of discussion about what preprints mean in how we discuss science in mainstream media.
Right. And again, back to you, Jessica, how preprints have been used by journalists. I guess this also addresses one of your recent studies about, again,
Yes.
the COVID-19 preprint usage in media.
Back to this paper from Nicholas Fraser et al. So we looked at the COVID-related and non-COVID-related preprints, again, of bioRxiv and medRxiv, and found, almost basically an order of magnitude higher interest in terms of abstract views, PDF downloads, and tweets and news articles as well. So I think this is really an unprecedented time in terms of attention on preprints. This is a time when many people are finding out about preprints, considering preprints, or really taking seriously their impact for the first time. And this, I think, is bringing up a lot of conversations about their value and relative value. And so this is a great time to be having those kind of discussions. I just want to say, though, that with the increased attention of preprints in the media, there's always the danger that perhaps a journalist, by covering a preprint, especially with the incentives that many journalists are now facing to get as many clicks as possible, to produce stories as quickly as possible, there's a fear that this type of coverage could be perhaps counterproductive or amplify the wrong messages. But I think it's very exciting that there are several efforts among journalists to create best practices and sort of propagate those best practices. For example, here's two examples of Ed Young and a article from Roxanne Campsey, which basically say that the idea is that there's an additional burden on journalists to consult experts in the field and use that information to not only include in the final article, but even decide whether or not to cover the paper at all. Toward that end, I just want to tie this back to what Monica was saying earlier about expert commentary. The ability of journalists to discriminate which papers are well received within the community and are more likely to be sound can be aided by public commentary on preprints. So this is a survey performed by bioRxiv, which came out, I believe, last year. And what you can see is that there is a large amount of private feedback that is given on preprints. But even outside of the commenting section, there's much activity that's happening on Twitter. So, from this point of view, this is not only a mechanism of rapid feedback for authors, but can also help readers contextualize papers. And therefore, I think going back to this OASPA encouragement, it makes sense that this type of public feedback on preprints benefits really all stakeholders who care about their use.
Absolutely. And I guess in the audience, we have someone from the active epidemiologist community on Twitter who hopefully will start telling us more during the Q&A session. Thank you, everyone. I would like, again, to get back to the room and ask you now, after all this discussion that we had in the past 45 minutes, what do you think about the preprints and their role in rapid dissemination of COVID-19 related studies in general? And there we go with the questionnaire and the votes, Mary. thinking that preprints are, it's actually, it's an opportunity to have them. That's fantastic. And the last vote would be then about how do you see your role in future in connection to preprints and independent peer review services. So can you also set that poll up, Mary, please? It's going that the journals are, their journals are supportive, and there seems to be some extra activity needed to go on, and the focus of maybe seeing how the opportunity can appear for using independent peer review services in collaboration with preprints services such as pre-review that Monica presented, and unfortunately we didn't have Janne to present Peerage of Science. But with that, I would like to thank all our panelists again, and Mary for helping us with the vote, and all the people in the room who voted. And Duncan, can we hear from you about the Q&A session?
Yes, just sorting myself out. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, we actually, despite your request at the beginning, we don't have any specific Q&As in the Q&A box.
Okay.
It was all
in the chat box.
Yes, very active, highly active chat in the box. An awful lot of questions, and just trying to pick out some specific things.
And I have to apologize, Bahar, I was one of those people quickly replying to them. So
brilliant, okay.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
No, that's great to see the interaction. Okay, and wherever it happens, it's great to see that it is happening. So is there anything that, Mario, because you were following them, did you find anything worth specifically mentioning here?
I think, to me, what is very interesting is this question of sustainability and making it available that you do have plagiarism checks or similar checks that can be run for preprint servers that mostly are underfunded when it comes to big publishers and journals. And one of the things that I would like to say is that we're expecting, because I know a few projects that are going to be live very quickly soon on, which screen published papers, and they're releasing their software, so they're not going to be changed for a lot of checks that we're talking about today. So including, do you have your conflict of interest statement, ethical approval statements, or data sharing statements out there? Not saying that having them means that you properly spell them, but it isn't like a spell check. It is something that is now being, that will soon be released to the public. And I think when that is implemented to the servers, because that is of no free cost if there's open source, that may help smaller communities and even smaller journals do some of the checks that maybe bigger ones could afford and the small ones cannot right now. So I think that's something that is interesting that came out here for me. But that is also, you know, of all the checks we do on journals, it's very few journals that even today post all the checks that they have done. We sometimes describe those in our instructions to authors or in policies of journals, but the actual steps, how many people did it, who did it, when it was done, do you guarantee that this was done? Did we check every people's working email? Did we check their affiliations? A lot of those things we based on trust. We believe that a paper that is submitted to a journal, that we should allow a lot of trust to that, and you know, but do we check everything? We often don't, and so things happen, and we've seen it happen recently with Lancet papers and the New England Medical Journal papers that we retracted on COVID, where people, you know, saw just a 1 hour check to see if this institution exists and how many people work on it could have detected this. But we as journals often don't do that, and I as an editor often don't. I believe that when they send me this and I see an affiliation that I believe exists, I will often invite reviewers to look at this paper, and it may be that some of those are completely made up. We don't have 100% mechanisms that say that we check everything that is done there. A lot of it, I think, still in publishing is based on trust.
Yeah. Well, we have Janne on the call, so that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you for joining, Janne, and sorry for not having you earlier. We had to just leave you behind and go ahead. But now that you're here, maybe we can have a little bit of an introduction about Peerage of Science and the project Transpose, if you can give us a little bit of an introduction about it. And then because we have already followed on the Q&A, maybe you can also tell us like very quickly about the discussion that is now happening among epidemiologists on Twitter on papers on preprint. Can you?
Yeah, I'm very sorry to be a little late. I thought it was 15 past, so
don't worry.
Academic order got me checked. So you asked about the transparent review in preprints initiative. So if I quickly share my screen. Which should be now. So what happens in transparent review in preprints is that someone has a preprint in bioRxiv, and they then upload that preprint into Peerage of Science, and they can easily do it inside bioRxiv in their own author area. So many other journals and peer review services, not just Peerage of Science. We receive the XML, we parse it, and then the peer review starts on our side. The peer review process in Peerage of Science is somewhat different from what happens in journals, in that we have a user base currently about 5,000 people who are verified scientists. We check that they're real people, they have publications, they've been first or corresponding author. But once you're in the walled garden, you can engage any manuscript as a peer reviewer. Editors can also recommend peer reviewers. They send in their reviews. Those reviews get peer review of peer review. We call it proper peer review, which means that they judge and score each other on the accuracy and justification of the arguments in those reviews. And participating journals all simultaneously can see those reviews, and they can make direct publishing invitations to the authors if they want to. But what happens with TRIP is that we then upload those reviews into bioRxiv, where they get displayed right next to the preprints. I can show you an actual preprint here in bioRxiv, where right on the right side of the screen, there is a blue tab saying peer reviews. You click that and it opens these reviews, which start with a simple color-coded overview of the revision recommendations, and then all the reviews, and including what weight the other reviewers gave to this reviewer. So they're given comments about the merits, critique, discussion, and there's, in this case, there is probably a longer peer review than the actual manuscript even is.
And the definition of weight, can you also tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the review with weight 1 is the best review in that round in the opinion of the other reviewers. So they give a numerical score to each other. And the other ones are then relative to that.
Right. Well, that's really well thought. I think it's great to see this happening on bioRxiv in such an embedded way. Do you also see the usage? So how many of those bioRxiv papers have this link and the previews available?
I will have to return to that question later. I can't say off the top of my head
certainly
how much it is. Yeah.
And maybe we also can have a quick discussion on the Twitter way of peer reviewing preprints. Do we have Emma in the room? I could see her name. Yes, hello. So I'm going to just, because Janne, maybe you can give us a little bit of an introduction about the discussion happening on Twitter, particularly among epidemiologists.
Yeah, one of the striking things about preprints in the past 5 months is how rapidly and effectively peer review has happened in Twitter. So a preprint comes along, sometimes with outrageous claims, such as the genetic code being close to HIV, and then within hours, actual experts come and give peer review of that, and it works really well in this particular case. And Dr. Emma Hotcroft is one of the epidemiologists who's been particularly active on this, a very great resource to follow. And I was thinking maybe she could give her perspective on why did this suddenly happen.
Indeed,
COVID
because that particular study you mentioned was also highlighted by Jessica. Emma, can you like in 1 or 2 minutes summarize the discussion? How is it happening?
Sorry, I missed the last part of what you said.
How the discussion happens among epidemiologists on Twitter?
I mean, I definitely think for this pandemic, the role of preprints and of kind of Twitter-based review has been invaluable because it's been the fastest way to keep up with the most recent things that are happening, both in the preprint world and then what other scientists think of them. I think that, so certainly for me, this is the first that I've learned about the fact that you can do like open peer review on like bioarchive papers. I don't know how many other scientists are more aware of this. But I think that in a lot of ways, Twitter is, as someone else said in a comment, Twitter is kind of the easiest way to give this kind of feedback and the most conversational. And it also, I think one thing that makes it attractive is that it means that you don't necessarily have to write a full review where all of your thoughts are clearly kind of explained and you've formed one opinion about a paper. On Twitter, you can maybe say that I'm concerned about this part of a paper, but I don't really understand this other part. Can anyone else explain it to me? That's fine to do on Twitter, but clearly if you were reviewing a paper, this would not be terribly useful for the editor, or maybe it would, it depends on the circumstances. But I imagine that when giving more formal feedback, either through this service of doing it on bioRxiv or for an actual review, you're more formal about it. And so you want to make sure that you have the full background and a full argument for how you think about a paper. On Twitter, you can be a lot more relaxed about it.
Absolutely, and then there is also the angle of the diversity, and in Twitter we have always this chambers of echoes going on, and it's not also a platform that is widely available outside Europe and America. And for example, because pandemic studies are also quite happening at the level of China, for example, I don't think they would be participating in any of the discussions that are happening on Twitter.
Yeah, so I think that this can be problematic as well, is that of course not everyone's on Twitter, and so you are not going to get a full diversity of your reviewers that hopefully you'd get through a more traditional process. But I also think that during this pandemic time, it's been hard for people to have the time to go through the more traditional as well. And this has provided an alternative for that, for better or for worse.
Thank you. Well, we passed the time. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for helping to form the discussion and going through all these hot topics. Thank you for joining, and thank you, Mary, for the great support. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.